I'm Paul Van Squike, your Taekwondo guide, and this is Topic Tuesday. And guys, I've got a crazy one for you today. You will not ever look at the forms, the Poomsae, the Hyung, the Kata, ever the same way again after you hear this conversation. You know, it's so hard to get at this idea that I've restarted the video twice now. And I never do that. I always just talk all the way through. This is a hard one to unpack. And then I'm gonna see if I can get to your topics too here, guys, because this show is, after all about your topics, your questions to me that you leave in the comments and I address, and that's this thing then that we call Topic Tuesday. Someone else has something similar to this called Karate Thoughts. His name is Daniel Moreno, and he has a channel called Practical Tang Soo Do, and you should go check it out and subscribe if you haven't. He shows lots of cool ways you can practice applying the movement of forms. In his most recent edition of Karate Thoughts, he talks about Anko Itosu. If you've never heard of this gentleman, many consider him to be the father of modern karate, the creator of the Pinan, the Pyongan, the Heian, Kata, the forms that are at the base of many, many karate styles, including Tang Soo Do, and that later evolved into the modern Taekwondo Poomsae. We wouldn't have them without the Pyongan, Hyung, Kata forms. Without this man named Anko Itosu. And one of the things that Daniel was wondering is, did Anko Itosu create the forms to be void of meaning, or did he have an original application in mind for each movement? And he also wondered if traditionally the earlier forms had an original application intended by the creator, or if they were more a general movement practice that you could then add meaning to after the fact. And this has been a question that a lot of people have grappled with in the traditional martial arts world. And it's really interesting because most of the people who grapple with the issue approach this question from a strictly modern materialist lens. Now, when you start to delve into the differences of the sort of pre-industrial traditional mindset versus the one that we all have now, the modern mindset, there's some stuff that's so radically different that we have the hardest time entertaining it or wrapping our head around it at all. It's got what I call the flat earth problem. Sometimes I just ask people a hypothetical question because it's a fun psychological little game to play. I say, hypothetically speaking, if you knew for sure the earth was flat, would you tell people? And often they say, the earth isn't flat. They can't even engage in a hypothetical because their paradigm is so strongly rooted in a modernist lens. So you have to get yourself out of that modernist lens to understand what I'm about to get into. Now, I've only scratched the surface of this. And some of this is going to be strictly a hypothesis of mine because I don't know exactly where the dots connect. But I can give you some general themes that are absolutely true. And you can see that this is going to be pretty compelling if you can pull yourself out of a modernist lens. So, here we go. We're going to be delving into the realm of the esoteric. Before what I call the modernist lens, people thought about everything in terms of spiritual components, maybe you could say, astrology, alchemy. These things were key parts of many people's lives. Now, in the Western world, it's really interesting to study the mystery schools, one of the more recent ones being Freemasonry. and how exactly they operate. And I promise this connects. I promise this connects. You're going to have to, again, pull yourself out of your common way of thinking and start trying to embrace an old school way of thinking. And a good way to understand this is by examining how these secret societies like Freemasonry, these mystery schools, work. So when you talk to a Freemason, they will explain a lot of their symbolism to you. They will tell you about how the group functions. And when you join, this is the understanding that you have. And then as you move through the ranks, as you become more initiated into the teachings, deeper alternative meanings for the different symbols, the different practices are revealed to you. And you become less and less profane and more aware of the esoteric, the hidden practices of the teaching or the hidden understanding. And this is not unique to Freemasonry. This is how the mystery schools, which, I mean, I'm not going to be able to explain to you guys how profoundly these things impacted the West and Western history, but just understand that your mathematics and geometry and sciences all come out of these traditions. It was a prominent way of thinking in many cultures for a very long time. And so there was this idea of, as you moved through the hierarchy, you had different elements revealed to you. So this is also true of many Eastern practices. They had their own Taoist and Buddhist mystery schools. And you can understand that Taoism is Eastern alchemy. They're very closely related and share many of the same themes. So there's this idea called a talisman. And you can see talismans in Renaissance artwork and all kinds of other things in the West. And what you're doing is you're bridging the gap between the physical realm and the spiritual realm using symbols. You're sort of embodying in an object a spiritual energy. You're channeling it down into the physical realm. This is a common practice of magical thinkers, alchemical thinkers. So a lot of the famous paintings that you know about involve images of the gods and star alignments, and they might even be positioned inside of buildings that are aligned astronomically. And this is all in an attempt to channel down energy into that object. They do the same thing in the East. Now, interestingly, that the word kata itself, or hyung, means to carve something into the ground, and you can see that the forms make a shape on the floor. And often that shape is associated with one of these spiritual teachings. It's very true of the modern forms, the Taekwondo forms, which etch into the ground the trigrams of the I Ching, which are their divination signs. You might be able to say they're talismans. I'd have to dig into that a little bit more to know for sure. But my suspicion is, what I'm getting at here, is that the forms, whether it be the modern ones or not, but the original forms at the very least, were not just seen as functional combative devices, but as ways of channeling energies, be it chi or, in the case of Shinto, actual entities that they were trying to channel and use to their advantage into the practitioner. So there's a magical component, and that is part of the shapes that are made and what's inscribed on the floor. There's a talisman component to this. I'd love to connect the dots more. I'd love to make this a project at some point, if I ever get time to do something like that, and really show, if there is, a connection point from the original forms to different secret societies, be they Taoist or Buddhist. I know White Lotus Society and trying to remember the name of some of the others. They're out there. So my suspicion is that if we try to view the forms strictly from a Western, modern, materialist lens, we'll certainly derive some of the original functionality of the techniques, but we'll not see that there's a deeper meaning to much of it, which is completely outside of our paradigm, based on alchemical, magical thinking. Now, I'm not making any claims as to whether or not the alchemical stuff in the forms actually works. Coming from a Christian lens, I'm not exactly sure how to feel about that. I tend to be cautious when approaching things like that in terms of my own practice. But I think to deny its existence is foolish. Guys, this stuff is inside of all of the classical architecture you look at. Start looking into sacred geometry. These are realities that are hidden right in front of us. They conceal esoteric meaning, and it all connects to the stars. I could really go into this, but I think I'm going to stop there, and I'm curious what your thoughts on that subject are. And Daniel, if you listen to this, I'd really like to hear what you think about the forms outside of them existing as a physical practice, but whether or not you think there's anything to this idea that they have a alchemical type of thinking embodied in them, and that is part of the way that they're set up in terms of a pattern, in terms of the order of the techniques, in terms of the shape of the techniques. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. All right, I'm going to jump into your topics now. From JV Kanufan 8115. Really love Topic Tuesday. Question: what fitness benefits do you feel Poomsae can confer to a practitioner, particularly older practitioners? I recently had a health scare and would like to incorporate Poomsae practice into my rehabilitation and would like your opinion on what may be beneficially impacted by Poomsae practice. Thank you again. Yes, good question, and sorry to hear about your health scare, JV Kanufan. So, first of all, the word Poomsae is composed of several characters that break down into articles on cultivating strength, implying that the very purpose of the Poomsae is to cultivate or grow, or nourish your physical and mental strength. So how can this happen? Well, if you practice Poomsae non-stop, you will keep your heart rate up high. It's going to be very similar to jogging or running on a treadmill or any of those other sort of cardio exercises. Now the mechanics, if you do them correctly, the low stances, the popping out to kick, all of that definitely helps strengthen and tone the body. It builds a lot of core strength. So there's certainly a strength building component to the forms. And the demands that you place on your hips, opening them in various ways, will certainly promote a greater range of motion as well. And I think there's something to the focused repetition of the form that helps build the mental component of it as well, sort of a mental toughness, an increased ability to focus, and an increased sense of attitude just because you're envisioning this sort of winning that you would. This is a hard thing to put into words. When you perform Poomsae, you're winning against an imaginary opponent, and there's some sort of, I believe, mental benefit to that in terms of of just building the way you carry yourself, your confidence, because you've been constantly engaged in this sort of positivity of winning a combative situation by performing the Poomsae pattern. So, yeah, lots of health benefits. And if you are a martial arts practitioner, would you rather do Poomsae or would you rather run? I'd rather do Poomsae. And I'd rather get my heart rate up that way because it's more relevant to what I'm doing. Hope you do okay there, JV Kanu fan, and I hope that you find your Poomsae to be physically of benefit to you. From my producer, Daryl. Hello, yes, definitely answering my questions and positively more. I'm sure your hard work here will have a lasting impact on your students, viewers, and producer. Haha. Speaking of dobok, what would you like to discuss the evolution of the Taekwondo uniform for next week? From Taekyon to the traditional crossover leading into the V-neck, its advantages, where they derive from, etc. Is the school crest still shown by logo or patch? Does your school have their own? Are there rules or guidelines as far as how much you can advertise? Your opinion on putting country abbreviations across the backside. How much is too much? Where is the fine line drawn? Does sponsorship play a role in Taekwondo? Do they use a uniform to advertise or mainly just billboard or screens during competition? Until next week, I hope the kicks are high and dojang bills are low. Thank you, Daryl. Let's start with the evolution of the dobok. So, of course, the original martial arts uniform that we think of, the white pajama-looking uniform, originated with Jigoro Kano, the founder of Judo, and then was adopted by karate practitioners along with Taekwondo practitioners. And this is my understanding. This is what was told to me, but I have not researched it for you, Daryl. I'm sorry. So what was told to me is that the Korean hanbok, the traditional clothing, was more akin to a V-neck in style. And so to sort of Koreanize the karate uniform, they switched it to the V-neck style. As far as advantages or disadvantages, well, I can tell you from my point, teaching a lot of children, that having the crossover uniform is definitely more of a hassle with children because they're always putting the wrong side on top. It's always becoming untied. I mean, belts are hard enough with these kids. So it reduces complexity when you're teaching children. But I can't think of any hard advantages or disadvantages outside of that. If you want to train other components outside of sport Taekwondo, then the crossover, I think, is actually more conducive because if you're grabbing and pulling on the uniform a lot akin to judo, then the V-necks tend to tear. So I often will wear a crossover, actually, for that reason. Now, all of these other questions, Daryl, I'll be honest, I have 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the sport world. I'm not really the guy to go to with these precise sort of legalistic sport questions. I do have someone who seems to listen to a lot of these that goes by Terminal Monk, who could probably answer all this much better than I can. Terminal Monk seems to know a lot about sport Taekwondo, so I assume they're involved in it to some degree or another, or where they understand the rules quite well. So when it comes to patches and country names and all of those things, I'm not the guy to ask. I've never personally seen any advertising on a dobok or on a screen at a Taekwondo competition. So I don't think that sponsorships play any role whatsoever. But again, this is not my realm, so Terminal Monk, do you have anything to say about that? Leave a comment if you would be so kind. Speaking of Terminal Monk left a comment last week. And Terminal Monk says, I've made a couple comments voicing disagreement to some of your points before, so I feel obligated to engage with at least a question at least once. By the way, terminal monk should write a book on how to disagree with somebody, because terminal monk is super polite about it, and often I'm like, well, thank you for letting me know that, because they'll bring something to the table I wasn't aware of, and they'll do it in a way that's not condescending. So you welcome it. It's like really friendly discourse. It's great to have. It's great to have that. There's people I've blocked because they're just so rude and insulting about how they make a criticism. I'm like, well, if I encountered you in real life, I wouldn't be around you. I'd push you out of my life, so I'm not going to let you on my channel either. Terminal monk disagrees with me very politely, and so terminal monk should write a book on how to engage in civil discourse. Okay, terminal monk says, in my area, there used to be a very healthy ecosystem of USAT certified referees. However, in a post-COVID world, that ecosystem is significantly damaged, and it has had a very visible effect on local events. Does your school frequent USAT sanctioned events or events that have primarily USAT certified referees? If not, what are the common credentials of the referees at tournaments you frequent? If so, have you seen a decline in the number of experienced officials after the pandemic? If you don't find these questions very applicable, any insight to what type and level of competitions your students participate in would be very interesting as well. Yeah, so as I just said, I have only one foot in the sport world. I'm very fortunate to work with a sparring coach who loves sport Taekwondo, and so he runs the sport program in my school, and he would be a great guy to ask this to. But I can speak a little bit to it, certainly. So yes, after COVID, there's a huge difference. And yes, the USAT events seem like they're a lot less popular. There's definitely a political rift of some kind that's occurred, and I'm not qualified to speak to this at all, to speak on this. But the AAU has definitely become more popular here, and I think what's going on is that there's a lot of just crossover between the referees between USAT and AAU, but there's certainly some who stick to one or the other. As a non-sport guy, I haven't really seen that. I don't notice any difference in quality from officials between AAU events and USAT events. Like with anything, you get some good, some bad, some in between. I think generally all of the people who volunteer for this stuff, they try really, really hard, and their heart's in the right place. And if they mess something up, it's just because they had a bad moment that day. That happens to all of us. So I tend to think highly of the people who volunteer for these sorts of events. I haven't seen what I would call a low-quality person in either group, really. But yeah, there definitely seems to be a much stronger emphasis now on participating in AAU events. Now, I've spoken to some people about this, and I know USAT here is really strongly promoting safety, sports safety, and like that everyone involved in the organization is taken through very stringent training on education on being a good, safe coach, whereas the other one is a little bit more lax. But what I can say is that certainly creates barriers to entry, because a lot of the, last I remember at least, a lot of the students who want to participate in one of these USAT events has higher costs associated with it for memberships and then going through this sort of training process as well. But I don't want to talk too much about it, because I don't know enough to make an informed opinion, I guess. But there's definitely a difference. Just to answer your question, there's definitely a difference. So it'd be interesting to hear what people in the sport world have to say about that. All right. This is from, I don't know why it goofed up on my printout, but Keisha, who I extracted this from a comment she made. Question, do you think holding stretches for 5 minutes per pose is beneficial for gaining the splits? I discovered yin yoga is it beneficial for martial arts or martial artists? I mentioned to you with the other question you had about wearing sparring gear to train for sparring. So she asked a question a few weeks back about if it was better for building endurance for sparring to put your gear on and do all your sparring drills in the sparring gear, like specifically heavy bag rounds and that kind of thing. I said, well, experiment with it and see what works best for you, because I don't have an exact answer on something like that. And she tried both, and she said she actually found the training in the gear was really beneficial for her. So maybe, Keisha, maybe you found out something that nobody knew. And you're going to make an innovation, and soon every single Olympic athlete's going to have all their gear on at all times. I don't know. But when it comes to stretching, I've had the privilege of working with one of the local Poomsae coaches and competitors, and I'd love to actually get his opinion on this. Sometimes he does watch these. So if you're watching, you know who you are. You can let me know about holding for this length of time. But I'm going to try to relay to you what he taught me, and hopefully not mess it up too much, about stretching. And he has, I think, if I remember right, a degree in kinesiology, so well suited to talk about this. That stretching is all about training the body to sort of accept the opened position. So I'll give you an example of one of the ways that he teaches you to go into a split. He'll have you drop down, and then as you hold the position, contract and then release your muscle. Contract and release. And so every time you release, you sort of ease into it a little bit more. And what he says is that you're teaching your body to accept that position and not to try to protect itself by seizing up and making that movement impossible. What he says is if you put somebody to sleep, you put them under anesthesia, you can move them however you want to, because that protective mechanism that causes the muscles to contract and restrict your movement isn't there anymore. You can look up that exercise. I've seen it done. I was curious if I could find a video of it. I don't remember the name, but there's a therapy where they do just that. They put the person under anesthesia, and then they move their body through full ranges of motion to break up like scar tissue, that type of thing, if I'm not mistaken. Very interesting. So much of it is a mental game rather than actually like tearing the muscle to gain more range of motion. It's a teaching the body game. And so I got to imagine that there's a certain degree of that which is individualized, where like there's a method that works really good for you in teaching your mind that it's okay to open into that range of motion, and that method might not look the same for everybody. That's just a total hypothesis on my end. But that would be what I would guess is the case. So once again, I'll tell you to try the long stretches and see if you find it to be beneficial. I know I do. I like the wall stretch where you lay on your back and then open your feet up into a center split position, and you sort of pull on each leg until you get into that position as much as possible. Then you can just lay there and practice your breathing, and it's very relaxing, and I do certainly feel like that really helps open your body up if you hold it for a long time. On the flip side, I've had people tell me that it's completely pointless to stretch for more than 20 seconds in any given position. So, like many other things, nobody seems to agree completely on this. There's research done on it, but I think it's still young, and I don't think we have any conclusive answers on the exact right way to do any one thing in athletics. Outside of this way seems to produce high-level athletes, and then everybody gravitates toward that trend, and then something else gets figured out, and everybody gravitates toward that trend. But like I said last time, to some extent, everybody's just guessing. And I'm curious how much the mind has to do with it. Like when you align yourself with a formula that you think is a winning formula, so you're like, this is what the Olympic coach is doing, I'm going to do that. How much of the benefits you get from that is simply aligning yourself with that energy, aligning yourself with who you think is a winner. Monkey see, monkey do. How much is just monkey see, monkey do? I'm really curious about that. So let me know. You told me the sparring gear thing worked really good for you. Let me know what the stretches do for you. Report back, just like last time. All right, guys, it's been great. You know how this works. For next week's Topic Tuesday, get down in those comments, leave me a question, and then I'm going to talk about that next week. It's all about you and what you want me to talk about. And don't forget to check out my website, tkdguide.com, for free training courses, including one about various exercises that was inspired by the gentleman I was just talking about. A lot of the exercises that he's shown me are in there. It's totally free, and you can follow along and try to build the physical base that will make your Taekwondo better. All right, until next time, enjoy your training.